today's talk, this is another way we do it, is by loving what is. Last week we talked about judgment. And judgment is based on the story I make up in my mind, isn't it? And I can choose to write a new story. And I can begin today. I loved your face, Julia, when you sang about the rain on your skin. I can just see you out there spinning around in it. But that's what it feels like. That's what it feels like when I get out of my stuck story. The primary cause of unhappiness is not that person that I'm blaming everything on, not that situation. It's my thoughts. It's my judgments around it. So every judgment, every complaint is simply what? It's the story I'm making up in my mind about it. And guess what? I completely believe the story. My hurt, my pain, my frustration, my anger, all created by my judgment, by my resistance, and by my non-acceptance of what is. No one, and you've heard this over and over, no one, no thing outside of me can hurt me. Only I can hurt myself by believing those stories my ego keeps making up. So if you checked our Facebook page, I put a Byron Katie quote on there. You can argue with the way things are. You'll lose, but only 100% of the time. I studied with Byron Katie some 20 years ago. It was when she was first starting. And I remember it was a park in Salt Lake City, and a few of us were around a picnic table. And that's we were learning the work there. And then later I went out to Barstow, California, to her center to study with her. This was a time in my life where I was trying to keep a very lucrative consultant business going, and at the same time thinking I could control my partner's addiction to crack cocaine. He was my personal partner in personal life. He was my partner in the business. He was the business. And I'd hear Katie say things like, how do you know it's supposed to be happening this way? Because it is. And then she would say, life will give you whatever experience is most helpful for evolution of your consciousness. It sure didn't feel like that. And she'd say, people should be kinder, my children should be better behaved, my spouse should agree with me, I should be thinner, prettier, more successful, and then she'd look at you and go, is that true? And you'd get it. You'd feel it drop in. And I'd go, my partner shouldn't be an addict. Is that true? You know, I've been talking about the dark night of the soul and being out of it, and how much has come up for healing during that time. And so as I'm writing the talk, I didn't know this talk was going to end up being about Byron Katie, and when I studied with her, I went to one of the books that I got at that time. It's called A Cry in a Desert. It's the first book that was put out. And I said, I'm going to go through and look some of the notes I wrote in here. And I opened it up, and I found it wasn't inscribed to me. It was inscribed to my partner. We must have mixed books up when we separated. And it said, blank, dearest. I love you would keep our friendship active. I love you all, A-L-L, another word, ways. Byron Katie. She was telling him that she loved him as he was. She saw it, but I couldn't at the time. And I went through and I just realized as I held this book that another healing was happening for me around this whole incident. You see, we do our healing at levels. We start where we're at. And as we heal, as we grow, then a time comes we can go a little deeper. Then we go along on that level until there's a time where we can get a little deeper. And we never know when that's going to happen. And I never expected this to come up for me. He underlined, in the mind of God, I will still exist as perfect. It is when I leave that mind, step aside from that place of love and peace and joy, that sickness occurs. And suddenly I could hear his pain. Something I couldn't hear when I was with him. I found this. The tyrant residing in my own mind is, I haven't got my glasses on here. The tyrant residing in my own mind is inextricably connected to the tyrant I perceive outside of me. This one, he has arrows all around. You move totally away from the mind of God, good, when you believe you have a legitimate reason to suffer. And I realized how much he was suffering during that time. But I couldn't see it then because I was in judgment. I wasn't accepting. I was resisting. And the last thing, know who you are. Even if it seems you will lose everything. Even if it seems you will lose your life, your sanity, yourself. Don't be afraid. The old world will disappear, and you will awaken to the realization of God within you. Just even holding the book now, I can feel tears. But I didn't know any better at that time. I only knew how to judge. I only knew how not to accept. I only knew how to resist. Since the beginning of time, people, we have been trying to change the world outside so we can be happy. That's what I'd been trying to do. And it didn't work for me. Has it ever worked for you? No. When I see my life as negative, when I whine, complain, moan, groan, want it to be different, that's my ego resisting. That's me making up a story so I can blame everything else for my misery. My story is telling me the cause of my problem is you, is the situation. You're responsible for my suffering. And whatever my ego creates, it creates more problems. You've been there, you know that. You get stuck in that ego and you watch that story going, and what does it do? It takes to another problem and to another problem. And I am forever what? I'm always going to be the victim. Katie would ask this, who would you be without your story? I love that. So right now, what story have you been making up? You all have one. There's something going on. What story have you been making up? And just think for a moment. Who would you be without it? What's that song we sing at the beginning? Free, unlimited, no chains that bind me. It's that simple. Right? Everything happens for us, not to us. Do you hear the difference? It happens at the exact right time, no matter how it appears in the moment. This was the exact right time for me to do this talk, for me to be drawn to this book again, to these teachings again. As I was doing my research, I found this little item that talked about after a big dinner, big night out celebration, a businessman woke up the next morning with cramps and kept him in the bathroom all morning, and he wasn't able to go to work. If he had gone to work, his office was exactly where the first plane hit on 9/11. What seems good, his dinner seemed like a great thing at the time, can turn out to be a terrible experience. He didn't feel so great in the morning, kind of like when you go out and celebrate at night, don't feel so good the next morning. And what seems bad can turn out to be good for us. And we hear so many stories about people missing a plane, and that plane ended up crashing. We've heard a lot of that lately. My opportunity to travel extensively with a successful business seemed really good, and it was. But working and living with someone with an addiction seemed really bad. It was my partner's struggle with addiction that brought me to a Unity Church. It was the flexibility and the financial means of the business that allowed me to spend weeks at a time at Unity Village studying, and eventually led me to ministry. To see how that whole thing was unfolding for my good, even though I couldn't see it, even though I was resisting and fighting it at the time. There's a story I've heard of a Zen master, and you may have heard it. I love this story. This beautiful girl in the village, she wasn't married, and she became pregnant. And her parents were outraged. And she wouldn't tell them. She resisted telling them who the father was. And finally, they just kept at her, and she finally said, it was the Zen master. The parents were so angry, and they went to the master accusing him. And he very calmly stood there and said, is that so? The child was born, and the parents brought the child to the master and said, it is your responsibility to care for this child. And the master reached his arms out, and he lovingly took the child and said, is that so? About a year went by, and the girl couldn't stand it anymore. She wanted her child. And so she finally told her parents it was a young man in the fish market that was the father. The parents went to the Zen monk, the master, and they apologized, and they asked for forgiveness. And as the monk handed the child back to them very lovingly, he said, is that so? The difference between being happy because of outer events and inner happiness and peace, you see, the monk wasn't moved no matter what happened. Is that so? He accepted the moment. Inner peace, inner happiness comes from my ability, no matter what's happening, to say, is that so? No matter who's blaming me for what, no matter what's being dumped on me. That happiness out there, remember guys, it's a temporary fix. You've had it, right? Not feeling so good, I think I'll go out and buy something. And what, in a few days, you're tired of it? That happiness from that thing is gone? Even coming here, you come here and you feel great. But how long does it last you? All right, you get an A. We want it in here. And this is why you come here. This is what we're all looking for. So, let's get out of the head stuff. What's the how-to? How do I learn to love what is? It's very similar to what we talked about last week. It's very similar to what we have to do when we don't judge. And the first thing is to observe. Last week we talked about observing when the judgment comes up. I never know if I've got something back there or not. But we're observing this week, you're going to observe resistance. Notice if you're in a situation or with someone, notice the resistance. And remember we said, where do you feel it in your body? Because mind, body, spirit, our health is aligned with our mind. And so if I'm in a state of resistance all the time, what parts of my body am I putting into states of resistance? What parts of my body am I tightening up so that they can't function, so the energy can't move through them? Katie would say suffering is optional. And the only You didn't know that, did you? I'm going to say that one again. Suffering is optional. Joe got it immediately. Did you get it? Did it sink in? Because the only time I suffer is when I want the situation to be different than it is. When I want my life to be different than it is. When I want what's happening to be different than it is. And we know this. Whatever we fight, we strengthen. Whatever we resist, what? Persists. The second one, so we observe where we're resisting. We reserve what we're not accepting. The next thing we do is we surrender. We are present to the moment as it is. I'm only surrendering to the moment, unconditionally, without resistance. Because you know what? That's what it is. So how can I change this moment? I can't. I can just be in it. So if I'm sick, it doesn't mean I say, I need to accept this illness, this suffering. That's not what we're saying. It means when I'm sick, the moment is already as it is, isn't it? I'm already sick. I'm already not feeling great. There's nothing I can do about it. That's what I accept. I accept the moment. You hear the difference? I am accepting the moment as it is. So I'm not feeling good. Now, imagine yourself not feeling good, and remember all those feelings that go through you. Or someone has just said you have an illness, there's something wrong with you. The body goes into resistance, non-acceptance, when I could just be in that moment, because that's what it is. Here it is. And that's what the Zen master did. That's all he did. I'm sick. Is that so? Do you see how it just lets go of everything? The third thing we do is the same thing we do in judgment. We look for the lesson. We look to find the good. What's positive? We look for the lesson in the situation as if we had chosen it. Because you know what? On some level we have. On a deeper level, we have chosen what to experience. Our soul knows what it needs to grow, to become closer to God. And so experiences show up. You know, you've read stories, and I have. You've heard about people that have had something atrocious going on, and yet been in that place of peace, of calmness through the whole thing. And actually sometimes are there for other people through it. That's learning the acceptance, the non-resistance. The more I recognize the present moment as my teacher, the less and less negative thoughts I'm going to have, the more peace I'm going to have. And then, when I'm not resisting, when I'm not pushing things away, when I'm not using energy for that, I start to see the synchronicity of what's happening. How the right person seems to appear, how the right thing seems to happen. just at the right time. People, conditions for my higher good come to me with no struggle, with no effort. We're seeing this happen in church, aren't we? I mean, we saw a great example of that last week. I mean, we had this amazing performer just appear. Because our church consciousness has changed. It's grown. It's expanded enough to create that space. When we get it right inside, the outside falls into place. When I get it right inside, the outside falls into place. The shifting consciousness happens as soon as I say yes. There's a Buddhist term. It's called right action. And right action can only arise out of a right state of consciousness. Which means once I'm in that place of non-resistance, that place of acceptance, that place of just being, I don't have to figure out what to do. The action, the right action, comes from within. It moves from the essence of the spirit within me rather than the ego mind. And I'm not using all my energy anymore to resist. How much energy does it take when I keep pushing away, when I keep fighting? You know, we live in Florida, and we just know that we're going to have a few months of this kind of weather, don't we? And what do? We're just with it. This is a great example. But if you have a visitor come down from someplace, what do? They start immediately, I know I've experienced it, complaining about the heat. And you see them resisting it. They don't know what to do with it. But we do. We know you just don't resist it. You're just in it. That's exactly what we're saying. Whether it's the heat or an event or another person. The more I resist, and you know the heat, the more you resist it, what happens? The hotter you get. Right. So the more I resist something I don't like, the hotter it's going to get inside me. And then what happens in that place of non-resistance is we create a space for something new to emerge. So there's a new energy, a new intelligence that's greater than the limited power of my mind. Because it's deep within us. It's what we call our Christ self. So that energy, that intelligence, it starts to become activated. Because it has space to do that now. It has space to rise up, space to grow. You might notice sometimes that you're in a conversation and you're just very present with that person. And all of a sudden, words come from a deeper level. You're not even thinking about what you're going to say. But the words are there. The right words are coming. Because I'm in the moment. I'm not resisting. I'm present. And I have access to the real power inside of me. To the real spiritual gifts inside of me. It happens very, very gently at first. This transition in consciousness, this change inside of us. It's very quiet. It moves very slowly. It's kind of in the background, underneath. So you'll find yourself in a place where you're judging or you're not accepting or you're resisting. But at the same time, if you're practicing being aware of this, at the same time you're going to feel in the background something quiet, something soft, something very peaceful. And the more aware I can become of that, the stronger it grows. Until it becomes stronger than the loud noises that my ego makes. I start to move with a new freshness in my life, a new aliveness, a new oneness with God. There's a feeling of peace that just infuses us, becomes all of us. And that's when we become that instrument, that vehicle for Spirit, for God to move through us. That's when the unmanifested can flow into the world and take form. That's what we talk about in Unity all the time, about manifesting things. It doesn't mean I have to go out here and make this happen. It means I have to clear all that garbage out so that I can be clear, so that can be a clear flow of energy through me. How many of you go to any kind of an energy worker, acupuncture, massage, Reiki? You know what energy feels like when it moves through your body. That's what we are. And what we're doing when we stop resisting is we give that energy more space to move inside us. You will feel better. You will become healthier. So, don't spend your whole life waiting to start living. Don't spend your whole life waiting to start living. Like the song Julia said, you can choose to write your new story today. Practice acceptance, practice non-resistance, be present, surrender to the moment, start living, and start loving what is. God bless you.